She had no reason to trust him, just a stranger with a bruised face and nowhere to go. But something in his eyes reminded her of every lonely night she'd once faced alone. So, she offered him warmth, a couch, a meal, a sliver of hope. What Nora didn't know was that the man she took in wasn't just lost, he was hiding. And her quiet act of kindness would unlock a past he'd buried, and a future neither of them could have imagined. This is the story of Nora Blake, a woman who had every reason to stop believing in people, and Colt Avery, a man who'd lost everything but somehow found his way back, not to wealth, but to love. It began on a night when the Milwaukee sky wept like it knew the weight of everyone walking beneath it. The wind cut like glass through Nora's coat as she made her way home from the late shift at the diner. Her feet were soaked from slush seeping into worn boots she'd bought secondhand 2 winters ago. The air smelled like snow and diesel. Every gust made her flinch. At 29, Nora never imagined life would look like this. The dreams she once clutched in her 20s, traveling, building a home, becoming a pediatric nurse, now sat in a dusty journal buried under bills and baby clothes. Inside her coat pocket were 2 things, a cracked cell phone with no data and $4.86 in change she hoped could stretch into a meal if Mara asked for something extra tomorrow. As she passed apartment windows glowing with warm lights, she couldn't help but peer into them. Little vignettes of other people's lives, families eating dinner, dogs curled beside radiators, toddlers chasing shadows. She remembered having that once. Or thinking she did. 2 years ago, she lived in a townhouse on the West End. She had a fiancé, Henry, who kissed her forehead every morning and made Sunday pancakes. The day she told him she was pregnant, he hugged her, spun her in the kitchen, then disappeared by morning. No calls. No goodbye. Just an empty closet and voicemail silence. The landlord knocked with eviction papers 6 weeks later. She landed a job at a local pediatric clinic but was let go during layoffs. That's when she found herself wiping tables and carrying trays at the diner, working double shifts to afford diapers and gas. But still, she remained gentle. Her daughter, Mara, was the reason she smiled even when her eyes stung from lack of sleep. The little girl's laughter made Nora believe, if only faintly, that life could still turn around. As she neared her block, she pulled her coat tighter. Her apartment sat above a corner store that hadn't opened in over a year. The windows were boarded now, graffiti snaking across the panels. Her door was 3 flights up, past a rusted staircase and a porch light that flickered when it rained. She was almost there when she saw him. At the bus stop. The bench, partially shielded by the awning, was covered in sleet. And there, hunched over with his arms around a worn leather duffel, sat a man. He didn't move when she walked past. He barely breathed. She might have missed him entirely if she hadn't turned back to glance. His shoes were soaked. His jacket too thin for November. His jaw shivered, but he held himself stiff like a soldier in a storm. She slowed. Everything inside her screamed, keep going. You have a child. A routine. A boundary. But something about him, the hollow look in his eyes, the way he clutched that bag like it carried his last hope, stilled her steps. She stopped. Are you okay? She asked, her voice barely above the wind. He looked up slowly. Pale skin. Wet hair plastered to his forehead. Eyes that held both shame and surprise. Yeah, he croaked. Just, making it through the night. He said it like it was a script. Something he told himself every hour. She hesitated. Do you have somewhere to go? A pause. Then, no. She stared at him. She thought of the heater in her apartment that barely worked. The pull-out couch. The chipped mug of cocoa mix. The way Mara sometimes talked in her sleep, murmuring for stories and warm hugs. Her instincts warred. But her heart won. I have a couch, she said. I have a daughter, so I need to be careful. But, if you need to warm up, it's safe. His expression didn't change right away. Then it did. Slowly. Like someone realizing they weren't dreaming. You serious? Just for tonight. He stood slowly, water dripping from his sleeves. Thank you. I'm Colt. She offered a faint smile. Nora. Have you ever had to decide whether to trust a stranger? If this moment made your heart skip a beat, like the video and tell us, what would you have done in Nora's shoes? Colt followed her silently up the stairs. His footsteps were heavy, like he wasn't sure he'd be allowed to keep walking. When they reached her door, Nora unlocked it quickly, stepping inside first. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender detergent and canned soup. The living room was small, a second-hand couch, a leaning bookshelf, a soft light in the corner that flickered once before glowing steady. Colt paused at the threshold, eyes scanning the space. He didn't say a word. Nora gestured. The couch pulls out. There's a blanket in the hall closet. It's clean. I did laundry yesterday. He stepped in. His duffel made a soft thud on the floor. Thank you, he said. And he meant it. Nora glanced toward the back. My daughter's sleeping. Please don't make me regret this. I won't. And somehow, she believed him. She turned to the kitchen. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for a small pot. You hungry? You don't have to. I didn't ask if I had to. She heated up the last bit of lentil soup. 2 bowls. 2 spoons. As they sat at the kitchen table, the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was human. He ate slowly. Carefully. Like the moment might break if he chewed too fast. She watched him for a few seconds. The way he kept his eyes low. The way he held his spoon like it might vanish. My mom used to say the best people are the ones who stay kind when no one's looking. He looked up at that. Just a little. She sounds wise, he said. She was. Until she wasn't. Their eyes met. They didn't talk much that night. She learned he was from Chicago. That he'd been traveling around for a few months, looking for work, shelter, maybe peace. He learned that Nora worked nights, slept days, and lived paycheck to paycheck. And that her daughter, Mara, was her whole world. When they finished eating, she stood. I'm gonna check on Mara and get some sleep. Couch is yours. Thank you, he said again, his voice softer this time. She gave a small nod, disappeared into the back room, and closed the door behind her. That night, Nora didn't sleep. Not well, at least. She lay there listening to the creaks of the radiator and the occasional rustle from the living room. She thought of the man now lying on her couch, how soaked his coat had been, how gaunt his face looked under the dim kitchen light. She thought of the way his hands trembled slightly when he ate the soup. Her heart had been broken too many times to count, but something about Colt stirred not fear, but something softer. A quiet understanding. A strange kind of kinship. By morning, she dozed off for only a couple hours. When she finally stumbled out of her room, rubbing her eyes, the scent of coffee startled her awake. She blinked. Coffee? Colt was in the kitchen, holding a cracked mug in one hand, flipping pancakes in the other. You had mix in the cabinet, he said when he saw her. Figured it's the least I could do. She rubbed her face. You cook? He shrugged. Some. My mom taught me. At the mention of his mother, his face clouded briefly. Nora didn't press. Mara peeked out from the hallway, her curls wild and her pajamas mismatched. Colt crouched slightly and smiled. Morning. You must be Mara. Mara blinked at him, then grinned. You're the man on our couch. He laughed. Guilty. Are you a prince in disguise? She asked seriously. Nora froze. Colt looked just as stunned. No, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm just a tired traveler. That morning set a rhythm. Nora went to work while Colt stayed behind, tidying up, fixing small things, like the crooked cabinet hinge and the bedroom door that squeaked. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were thoughtful. One evening, Nora returned to find the living room rearranged just slightly, enough to make it feel more open, more inviting. A folded blanket here. A moved lamp there. Mara was sitting on Colt's lap, reading from a children's book. She made me do all the voices, he said sheepishly. Even the dragon. Nora smiled, but something warm and heavy settled in her chest. That night, after Mara fell asleep, Nora found Colt sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea. The window beside him rattled as wind scratched against the glass. She sat across from him, silent for a moment. So, why were you out there that night? Colt looked down at his hands. The tea steamed between his fingers. My mom passed away 6 months ago. Cancer. I was her only kid. My dad and I hadn't spoken in years. He paused. The silence wasn't awkward, it was heavy with memory. She was everything. I stayed with her until the end. After she passed, I just unraveled. I couldn't go back to Chicago. Couldn't face my father. I burned through what I had, tried to stay afloat. Couch surfed. Shelters. Then the street. His voice cracked slightly. I didn't want to be anyone's burden. But that night, standing at the bus stop, I was done. Nora reached out, gently placed her hand over his. You're not a burden. Not here. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, neither of them looked away. One afternoon, Nora came home early and found them dancing in the living room, Mara standing on Colt's toes, arms out like wings. There was no music, just her laughter and his quiet hum. She watched from the hallway, something twisting beautifully in her chest. But even as warmth settled in, Nora kept waiting for it to fade. Because that's what people did. They left. They made her believe in safety and then disappeared. So that night, when Colt stayed up late washing dishes, Nora sat beside him, drying the plates. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know," he said simply. She glanced at him. "So why are you?" He looked at her, eyes tired but steady. "Because this feels like the first time in months that I'm not invisible." Silence. "I used to think I had to earn every ounce of kindness," he added. "That if I couldn't contribute, I wasn't worth keeping around." Nora swallowed hard. "I used to think love had to hurt to be real." Another silence, this one heavier. He set down the last plate. "We're both wrong." That night, she didn't sleep much either. Not because of fear. But because something unfamiliar bloomed quietly inside her, hope. The days stretched on, one became 3. Then 5. And one evening, after Mara had fallen asleep watching cartoons, Colt stood by the window, staring out into the dark. "You okay?" Nora asked. He didn't answer immediately. "It's hard to sleep. I'm used to noise. People coughing. Sirens. Footsteps. You don't sleep too well either." She folded her arms. "How would you know? I hear you pacing sometimes. And once, you cried." Nora's throat tightened. She didn't deny it. "I don't mean to pry," Colt said. "I just know what loneliness sounds like." There was a pause. Long, heavy. Then she whispered, "You don't have to go yet. Not if you're not ready." He turned to her. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I know what it's like to need someone and have no one." That night, something shifted. Not love. Not romance. Something quieter. Like two people rebuilding trust in humanity through small acts of gentleness. Colt started walking Mara to her bus stop each morning. He'd zip up her jacket, kneel to her level, and remind her to eat all her lunch. Other parents started to take notice. One afternoon, a woman pulled Nora aside. "He your husband?" she asked, nodding toward Colt. Nora shook her head. "No. Just a friend." The woman raised a brow. "He's gotta protect his heart. Those are rare." Nora carried those words home. That evening, Colt sat on the couch reading a children's book to Mara, who curled into his side like it was the safest place in the world. Nora watched from the hallway, unnoticed. She clutched her coat tighter around her and felt something stir in her chest. Fear, hope, maybe both. Later, she pulled out an old notebook she hadn't touched in months and wrote a single sentence. "Sometimes, the people we shelter become the shelter we never knew we needed." Have you ever let your guard down, only to realize it was the best thing you ever did? If this moment touched your heart, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Stories like this are just getting started. The days grew colder, and Nora led Mara in every sweater and scarf she could find. One morning, Mara tugged Colt's hand at the door. "Are you gonna stay forever?" she asked. Colt blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, like, not leave. Like Daddy did." Nora's breath caught from the hallway. Colt crouched. "I don't know how long I'll stay. But I'll never leave without saying goodbye. I promise." Mara hugged him tightly. "Pinky swear." He locked his pinky with hers, and something inside Nora cracked open. Because maybe, just maybe, this wasn't temporary. This was the beginning of something new. If you've ever believed that healing begins with a small act of trust, let us know in the comments. We're building a community one story at a time. Christmas came by. The air outside cut like glass, and the old apartment barely kept the cold at bay. Nora sat at the kitchen table, wrapping Mara's gifts in grocery store paper bags she turned inside out and decorated with a red crayon. The presents were small, a coloring book, a set of plastic ponies, and a handmade scarf, but she wrapped each one with care, layering love where money couldn't go. Mara's laughter echoed faintly from the next room, where she played with Colt. He had turned a cardboard box into a makeshift sleigh, pulling her across the living room with a string and exaggerated ho-ho-hos. Nora smiled at the sound. She didn't know how long this warmth would last, but for tonight, it felt real. Then Mara coughed. Once. Then again. A deep, rattling sound that didn't belong in a child's body. Nora dropped the crayon. Her instincts kicked in before her mind caught up. She rushed into the living room to find Mara hunched on the couch, flushed and shivering. "Mara, baby?" Her forehead burned under Nora's palm. Colt stood, instantly alert. What's wrong? She's burning up, Nora said, already reaching for the thermometer. The reading blinked red, 103.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Panic rippled through her chest. She tried cold compresses. She called the urgent care hotline, her hands shaking as she spoke to a robotic voicemail. No appointments. No walk-ins. Not without insurance. Mara whimpered in her sleep. Nora sat on the kitchen floor, trying not to cry too loudly. She didn't want Mara to hear. Her little girl needed strength. Not a mother falling apart. Colt hovered nearby, helpless. What can I do? She shook her head. I don't know. Then, he was gone. 1 minute he was there, pacing. The next, the door creaked shut behind him. She ran to the window, heart pounding. He was nowhere. Just snow swirling in the night. Had he left? Like all the others? She sat beside Mara, rocking gently, whispering old lullabies through her own tears. She checked her phone over and over, even though she had no service. She thought of the man who abandoned her when she was pregnant. Of the nights she walked the city with a crying baby, no stroller, no home. She thought of how she'd let a stranger in. Trusted him. And he left too. She didn't sleep. By morning, the light outside was gray and distant. Nora hadn't moved from the couch. Mara's fever had gone down slightly, but her cough was worse. Then the door opened. Colt stepped inside, snow crusting his jacket, a paper bag tucked under one arm. Nora's eyes widened. Where have you? I'm sorry, he said quickly. I had to go. He handed her the bag. Inside, medicine, a bottle of children's fever reducer, lozenges, soup, and a small stuffed reindeer with a tag still attached. I sold my watch, he said softly. The one my mom gave me. It was the last thing I had from her. But Mara, she needed this more than I needed that. Nora didn't speak. Couldn't. He set the groceries on the counter. His hands were shaking. I didn't leave, he added. I just didn't know how else to help. I'm not good at this, at being needed. She stepped forward slowly and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't a grand moment. It was quiet. Broken. Real. Thank you, she whispered into his chest. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. It was Saturday morning, and snow fell like confetti outside their new apartment window. Nora was cleaning out the mail slot when she saw the thick cream-colored envelope with elegant script across the front. To Colt Avery. She stared at it for a beat before handing it to him. Colt froze. I don't know anyone who'd write me. He opened it slowly. Inside was a folded letter, typed neatly. Colt, if you're reading this, it means I found you. My name is Mark Holloway. I was your mother's attorney. Before she passed, she created a private trust in your name, independent from your father's estate. I've spent the past few months trying to locate you. Enclosed you'll find verification documents, account details, and a handwritten note from your mother. Colt's fingers shook as he pulled out the handwritten letter. He recognized her handwriting instantly, gentle curves and small hearts over every lowercase I. My darling boy. You always hated being told what to do. That's why I did this behind your father's back. I knew one day you'd need something of your own. Not money. A way back to yourself. This trust is yours, no strings attached. I hope you find peace, love, and something to believe in again. No matter how far you fall, you are never truly lost. With all my love, always. Mom. Colt sat in stunned silence. Nora didn't say anything. The trust held $2.1 million. He stared at the number for a long time, as though trying to decide if it was real. When he finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. She never stopped believing in me. Nora sat beside him, placing her hand over his. What will you do? She asked softly. He looked at her. The first thing? I'm not going anywhere. The seasons changed gently, as if the world had been waiting for them to settle before turning its pages. Snow melted into slush, slush gave way to early blooms, and in time, Milwaukee streets hummed with the cautious promise of spring. Nora had returned to school, slowly, at first, taking evening nursing classes after Mara fell asleep. It wasn't easy. Most nights she juggled work, study, and motherhood with a threadbare energy. But Colt made space for her dreams. He sat with Mara during her lessons, cooked dinner with that same quiet skill, and left encouraging notes on Nora's textbooks. You're doing amazing. One chapter closer. You've always had this in you. With part of the inheritance, Colt quietly created something of his own too, a non-profit foundation dedicated to helping people like him, those who had slipped through the cracks. The organization didn't bear his name. It bore his mother's, the Marlene Grace Fund. He filled it with job training programs, temporary housing, even a community kitchen. Nora helped him review grant applications on weekends, sometimes falling asleep with her head on his shoulder while papers lay scattered across the couch. They didn't talk about labels. Love bloomed not through grand declarations, but through every small gesture, the brushed hair, the shared jokes, the knowing glances when Mara said something surprisingly wise. But eventually, Colt knew. He wanted forever. He began planning quietly, looking for the right moment, not one drenched in diamonds or flash, but in meaning. One crisp morning in late fall, he asked Mara, "What do you think about me marrying your mom?" She blinked up at him, serious as ever. "Will I get to be the flower girl?" "Of course." "Then yes. You should do it." The proposal wasn't at a restaurant or a rooftop. It was at the same bus stop bench where Nora once offered a stranger warmth on a freezing night. Colt stood waiting with a small box in his hand, his breath visible in the chilled morning air. Nora arrived, bundled in her coat, hair tucked under a knit hat, holding a steaming travel mug. She paused, confused. "You okay?" He smiled. "Better than ever. Sit with me?" They sat. For a moment, silence stretched around them. The city rushed past, cars buzzing, people crossing intersections with headphones in. But in that space, it felt like they were the only two who existed. "You remember this place?" he asked. "Of course," she said softly. "You were shivering. And I almost didn't say anything." "But you did," he replied, turning to her. "You saved me before you even knew me." He opened the box, not with drama, but reverence. Inside wasn't a diamond. It was a slim, gold band etched with delicate words on the inside. "No condition is permanent." Nora's breath hitched. "That's what you told me that night, when I thought I had nothing left," Colt said. "You changed my life with a couch, a bowl of soup, and a second chance. Will you keep changing it, every day, for the rest of it?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, too full to speak. She slipped the ring on her finger and kissed him, the city fading into background noise. The wedding was small. Held in a local garden. Friends from the shelter Colt once stayed at came. So did Nora's classmates. Mara wore a yellow dress and scattered petals like she'd invented the role of flower girl. They danced under fairy lights, hands clasped, laughter rising into the darkening sky. Mara giggled as Colt spun her in circles, her curls catching the moonlight. That night, after the last guest left, Nora and Colt stood alone in the kitchen of their warm, bright home. The same radiator hummed, not broken, not straining, and a pot of soup bubbled on the stove. "We made it," she whispered. "We did. Do you ever think about that first night?" "Every day," he said. She smiled, eyes full. Crazy how something so broken could become something so whole. Colt wrapped his arms around her. "Maybe that's the only way it happens." If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. Who in your life has ever given you a second chance? Or who might need one from you? Leave a comment below to share your story. Like this video if you believe no act of kindness is ever wasted. And don't forget to subscribe to Everbell Stories for more heartwarming tales like this one. Because sometimes, the people who have the least to give, end up giving the most.